Welcome to the second episode of the Swishes podcast. I'm here with Rajat, Mitra, Armin Scharlach and Ciaran Crossin, and the subject for today is cost cutting. It's in the news with the president-elect, whose name I never mention, appointing Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, and Vivek Ramaswamy to be his cost-cutters, axemen extraordinaire in charge of a pseudo-government department called the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Is that a good thing or not? Is the fact that there's two of them in charge already a sign of something slightly odd if you're looking for efficiency? Is cost cutting a sign of failure, of actions not taken or promises not fulfilled? Or is it an essential part of corporate strategy? Ciaran, what's your view on cost cutting measures?
Right. Well, you give quite an introduction there, Bill. If I start and work back in your question and just say that, I've been in corporate life all my career, and cost cutting is an essential part of corporate life for many reasons. And current company that I work for, where a business just became inefficient and unprofitable for us in terms of what we were putting into it in terms of research and resources. And rather than wind that business down, it was essential for us to cut the cost of it to the company, but we sold it on to another company that could derive value from it. I had a similar experience when I worked in fiber spinning. As everybody knows, fiber spinning has now all pretty much moved to Southeast Asia. Been quite a large industry in Europe and North America for quite some time. And again, it was the fiber spinner that I worked for. We got bought over by a privately owned company, and they basically bought us as quite a bloated company. When we got bought over, I had heard that there was somewhere between 22 and 28,000 people in the business. And they introduced, this private company had a very, very strict kind of targeted operating model for how it ran its businesses and how it ran its business processes. And they sent into the company their consultants. Now, it wasn't one of the big consulting companies. It was actually quite a small consulting company. And they arrived with this kind of book of business processes. And that was it. That was this is the way we do it. This is the way it's going to be done. And you can imagine this scenario. The various managers, the various people that had built up little fiefdoms and kingdoms are in the meetings going, oh, no, that won't work. What if such and such has to do that? And it's just like, no, this is how you're going to do it. This is how the owner of the company wants it done. This is what the owner of the company is wanting to pay for.
Did it work, Ciaran?
Actually, it did work. It did work. Now, when I left, it was pretty brutal. And one of the things I noticed about it are, as I reflect back on it, the main reflection I have is that the cost cutting was directed at very, very unnecessary services. And in some cases, more investment was directed at what you would call the productive edge or the competitive edge of the business. And shortly after I left the company, I'd heard that with removing bloated areas of the organization, the population had dropped to just under 10,000 people.
From 28, from mid-20s?
Mid-20s, which I found shocking because...
Now, I'm going to ask, did this company that took it over, they had a playbook?
Yep.
Now, was that a playbook they built up over a lot of acquisitions, or did they just write the playbook for this one?
No, it was a playbook that they built up over lots of acquisitions. This company has been quite an acquisitive company over the years, and it's not one of those kind of venture capital funds. They are an operating company themselves, and they buy businesses that they think clip into their existing businesses. So they had interests in spinning fibers as well. Yeah. But this operating model they brought, if I'd have moved from, let's say, the fiber spinning business to they had interests in paper manufacture, it would have been the same operating model. It removed layers and layers of kind of what I can only see now is kind of hideously bloated, fatty business.
I'm going to go to Armin. There we have a playbook approach from a company that's used to doing acquisitions. In your consulting experience, you must have come across a few of those.
Absolutely. But first of all, I was very surprised, Ciaran, hearing about your history in fiber spinning, because not sure whether you are aware that 25 years ago, I was actually working for an e-marketplace for the textile industry here in Switzerland. And we were suffering from the traditional chicken and egg problem because that industry was so reluctant to do any changes, knowing that their cost was way too high. They all have more or less meanwhile gone bankrupt instead of doing some measures that could have at least extended their life for quite a bit. The interesting thing with this playbook approach that you mentioned, I think what you described is organization that has applied what's the traditional business model of private equity. When they buy firms that are not well managed yet, it's one of the very first things that these private equity firms are doing. Cost cutting in a smart way by looking after the processes and cutting away things that simply have been there because they have been there for years and no one ever dared to challenge them, to question them, and to address them. That typically results into very good improvement in very few years and is increasing the corporate value. That's the entire business model. So cost cutting as a business model, with even often without consulting, fortunately sometimes with consultants, but I can think it's a quite interesting one to bring this playbook model into action. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, Armin, before getting Rajat's opinion, if the companies that you mentioned, who happen to also be in fibres, had a copy of this playbook, do you think they would have been able to do anything with it, or would it just have been impossible?
And that's probably why the private equity scene is so successful. It very much depends on the leadership in the organization and how traditional their thinking is, how open they are for making changes and disruptive changes, and not just bits and pieces here and there. And unfortunately, way too often we are seeing organizations needing too much time to make these changes happening until it is almost too late, or even it is too late. So it would have worked, absolutely, but with the existing leadership, it would have been very difficult to make that change happen.
Thanks very much indeed. Rajat.
When you said cost cutting, it was, I was kind of going spend reduction, cost cutting, what are we actually talking about? So, I mean, the way you pitched at the start as well, is it admitting a failure? I guess very much depends on the business. I guess I was initially thinking at the start of this, you know what, you can't cost cut your way to success. But again, listening to Ciaran and Armin, you're like, actually, you know what, in a venture capital setup, yeah, maybe why not? You could actually cost cut, turn around the company and make it successful. However, my experience is probably 25 odd years in the procurement space of large multinational, larger corporates, if you like. And yeah, when you hit cost cutting time, you know you're in trouble. So in those kind of environments, growth was really, really hard. And and that's when you come across all these lovely words like discretionary spend, travel bans, control towers, and all the good jargon, which is probably out of a playbook, I'm guessing. That's what the organization gets into. And the other one, I think I'll come back to this later on the podcast, is I want to actually look at how the engagement of the co-workers and employees actually during the cost-cutting stage as well. So I think I'll come back to the human element later. But I think Ciaran wants a word.
Yeah, I just wanted to challenge in on one thing. This was not about cost cutting to growth. This was about cost cutting to profit, not growth. Profit was a surprising turnaround. Within 1 year, the piece of the company had gone from tens of millions of annual losses a year to between 10 and 200s of millions of profit the following year. So it's not cost cutting to rebuild the company. And something now that the company itself now still exists, still employing around 7,000 to 10,000 people worldwide, but it was more arrested or managed decline, but while still making profit.
So again, I think that just comes back to the people issue. I said from an engagement perspective, is cost cutting to survive, cost cutting to grow, and cost cutting to make profit. Now, again, I think the cost cutting measures are kind of perceived as quite draconian. And if it's for survival, absolutely. Hey, guys, we don't have a job unless we do this. But when you're going for cost cutting to profit, you're like, hey, actually, you know what? Some seniors up there want to hit their targets, and we're just cost cutting to help them get there. The engagement levels are slightly different again. So again, how you're selling the cost cutting measures and why you're doing it really has an effect on, I guess, the success and morale of the organization, etc.
I wanted to comment on Rajat, what you said earlier with the travel ban. I think that is a perfect example for cost cutting done in the maybe not most intelligent way, because it's this traditional haircut strategy where without really looking into the consequences. And as you all know, I'm in game theory for a living. And in game theory, you always think about not just the immediate next step, but also the second, the third, the fifth afterwards. And then try what is really the best option to choose from. And these very simplistic approaches, the haircut strategies, the travel bans, the consulting bans can backfire quite a bit. I had more than once the situation that clients had to postpone or even cancel projects which had a very clearly measurable and credible business case. It was a procurement project, it was a sourcing project. They were not allowed to conduct that project because of a consulting ban. And then it becomes a little bit ridiculous from time to time and short-sighted.
If I could just make a point there, I mean, I'd read this many years ago. This kind of across-the-board cost cutting, we want to remove 10% across the board, so it's 10% of everywhere, is the least effective way to actually reduce costs, because you end up, as I've said, what my experience with it, the guys that were actually doing the work, the guys and girls that were doing the work, that were bringing money in for the company, right? You take 10% of them out, then you're taking away 10% of your chances to get that revenue that you then make a profit on. So some of those across the board kind of cost cutting things, while it seems fair, that can be argued as being humanly fair. Well, 1 in 10 of every team is going to go. It may not necessarily be the best thing for the business.
Completely with you. And as Bill, you started the discussion chipping in Elon Musk's name. I recently watched a very interesting video about what he actually did in order to make SpaceX so successful and revolutionize the space industry. And it was not a haircut strategy where he tried just to be a little bit better than NASA or the other agencies, but with a real disruptive approach, forcing his engineers to think about complete new ways how to build a rocket engine, how to make it reusable, how to use modern electronics to make the entire rocket reusable. That is what has completely changed that industry and cut the cost of a space flight into a fraction of what it used to be.
I'm going to give you an example of one a bit like that, much closer to home, where Brian, who was a supply chain manager in the business I was in, and he just launched a major blockbuster. And just as he was sort of sitting back and patting himself on the shoulder and saying what a good job he'd done, the operations director said, "Now I want you to take 30% out of the cost of this product." But he did it not because they'd made a pricing error or because of failing sales. He did it because he foresaw future markets and future competition. So Brian had 2 meetings, and he included chemistry, engineers, quality, logistic, formulation, and he got them all in the room, and they nearly ended up in fights because he'd hoped that they'd all bring their little bit to the table, and he'd add it all up together, and it would be something he could sell to the operations director. It didn't amount to a row of beans, and most of the projects they came up with conflicted with each other, so they couldn't both be implemented. The 3rd meeting, they began to get it, and they suddenly realized that this was not the way to do it. And they got together, and they realized that by amalgamating, by consolidating some of the processes, by buying better raw materials, by having more flexible production, sometimes paying more, sometimes less, they actually achieved 30% and some. And it was the basis of the 5-year strategy for that product and the basis of 15 years of market domination. And it is in such contrast to an SAP project that was being rolled out, an ERP project, and the management decided to stop it before it was finished because they'd run out of money, only to have to restart it 3 years later whenever all the resources had gone away. Or another one where they closed formulation plants to bring the work inside, only for those formulators to go to the competition and give them all our secrets. And we lost our markets in short order thereafter. And the difference was, the first one was looking at the whole scope of the project, including time. It was systems thinking written all over it. And the other ones were just, how can we do this as quickly as possible and ignore the consequences? It does speak to what Elon Musk achieved, but what he's going to do with the US government, I have no idea.
And interestingly enough, and this is why I think Elon Musk is a special character, how we used to name these people here in Switzerland. But generally, I'm very positive and looking forward to see how he's actually doing certain things there, because he has a history not just with SpaceX, but also with Tesla, to really enforce disruptive thinking and then thinking outside of the box, something that has been claimed by too many people too many times in the past, but he's really doing that. And another example that comes to my mind that you might have also heard about in Tesla, one of the huge competitive advantages that he's having is not only that he's putting a lot of functionality in software that used to be in separate modules, but also the GigaPress has revolutionized, as many experts are saying, the production of a car, reducing the number of parts to be produced.
It's a GigaPress.
It's an aluminium die-cast press, and where in the past you had comparably small presses for small parts that then needed to be welded together, Tesla has actually searched for a manufacturer of a press so much bigger than anything else that existed in the past. That's, don't nail me down on the numbers, but I remember having seen somewhere that they reached out to the 5 big producers of these kind of presses. 4 of them said, no, it can't be done, and they refused to give an offer. And only the 5th one actually was taken up that challenge, and they succeeded, and they built a press which now allows them to press in one single step half of the chassis from a Tesla in one single step. A complete revolution in the production because someone dared to think outside of the box. I hope that this is the spirit that he's also going to apply on the public side, because I think we all agree in public, and I'm particularly thinking about public procurement, there is a lot that can be done better.
So yeah, I think Armin touched on the cost cutting resulting in innovation as well. So again, thinking on the topic, you got the GigaPress, the cost cutting that kind of just gets new innovation. The other one I was thinking, and a lot more simpler and probably affects us more, is like how cost cutting measures actually become the norm. So I'm just thinking of the airline industry. I mean, yes, we have a low cost model, but again, a lot of the major airlines, at least on short haul flights, kind of reduce the kind of food offering, whatever. I think it's got to a phase that, correct me if I could be wrong, but I think KLM is the only airline that still feeds you something substantial on a short haul flight. Everyone else actually got on. So what's starting off as cost cutting measures is now resulting in the norm. And I feel privileged to fly KLM, they still give you a sandwich. Everyone else charges you for stuff. So again, what's starting off of cost cutting measures just results in the norm for the industry, if you like.
Does anyone think that cost-cutting arises because, to get a bit philosophical here, because managers, directors, executives have got to their level of in the company because they've been associated with growth. Whether or not they were responsible for the growth is beside the point, but they've become associated with growth. That's their world. They know about investing and growth and profit and adding resources. And suddenly, when they're faced with a downturn, they panic. Suddenly people are throwing things at them and they don't know what to do. They've no experience of it. Is it the fact that they're reaching for a quick fix and they just don't know how to do it?
I can sympathise and sort of agree with that. It's also the way that capitalism works. I think it's the way the market works. When a company is reporting every quarter and it has its quarterly updates with investors. If you look at investors from a very dispassionate point of view, they're just like, where's the profit? No, we don't care about your problems. Where's the profit? Whatever profits you made the quarter before, they've already got the dividend and spent it, and they want more the next quarter. It's almost, to be honest with you, it's almost like the mafia, and in that sense of just, I've loaned you money, now you have to keep giving me money forever in ever increasing amounts. I'm being, a little bit facetious and seeing things perhaps in
a little bit facetious and extremely left wing.
Revolution, brother. But I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a criticism of the capitalist system. I think it's a feature of it.
It's more a feature of limited liability shareholder companies, isn't it, than private companies?
Like an investment vehicle or a pension company, they don't necessarily care what they're investing in the company. They don't necessarily care if there's any socially good outcome from that company or otherwise. It's just like, is there a profit in it?
Here's a question for you. How much of it is performative? Now, I was working in a pharmaceutical company. It was in Zug. You can start to guess. It wasn't the one you're thinking of. They had a bad quarter at the end of the year. And the CFO needed to magic up some numbers. And so he decided that he'd heard about these haircuts that other companies were running, the things that Armin mentioned earlier. We had to go to all the suppliers and say, please take 10% off your prices if you want to continue doing business with us. Many of them just laughed in our faces disdainfully, as we expected and deserved. Most of them actually came up with creative ways of pretending that they'd cut the prices. In procurement, we were all very happy to go along with that because it made it look as though we'd achieved something. And the CFO knew what was going on. He couldn't not have known. He was a clever chap. But he insisted on giving the procurement department an award for its achievements in delivering these artificial figures for the end of the year. It led me to believe that an awful lot of what executives do when they talk about cost cutting is performative. It's because savings are good, aren't they? And even though they're not real, we'll do it. Maybe is that stepping beyond the bound? Rajat, is that fair?
Well, kind of fair. And when you started off with the initial question on executives, I mean, they got superhero status, right? I think, was it Carlos Ghosn that actually was called the cost cutter himself? So, and if you get yourself a title like that, I mean, yeah, that's fairly ruthless. So that's performative. And he did all right. So it can't be that bad.
I think you touched an interesting point there, Bill. It's the incentivization that really drives people's behavior, as simple as it is. But if you're incentivized to just have a good story to tell without looking too much into the details, that's what you're going to do, for sure. Coming back to this idea what's happening there in the public space, I personally think that we have the equivalent problem that most people in public institutions, not only in procurement, but in procurement, I know it in particular, there are very much wrong incentivized, because there the buyers are incentivized to get what is needed in time and quality without too much noise. In the end, they are not really incentivized to create savings, get them at a very good price. It's quite the opposite. If they would structure a tender in a way that makes it too subjective in the selection and the award of the supplier, they're risking getting thrown in front of a judge and legal actions that can take years, and everyone is complaining and blaming them for not having done their job properly. And this is why they are designing their tenders in a way that makes them as legal bulletproof as possible, while we all know that is definitely not the way how you get the best value for the money solution.
I think when it comes to, that sort of value for money cost cut, I mean, I've been involved in Six Sigma for a number of years, and I've got loads of value for the technique.
Don't get me started.
I've got lots and lots of value for the technique, and I use it more or less near enough every day in my job. But the counting up of the Six Sigma savings, I mean, it's nonsense. It is all complete nonsense. I don't want to use the word you can cook the books, but yeah, effectively you do. I mean, a company I worked for, we were saving more than the company was worth to actually, in terms of Six Sigma. If the company was worth 10 billion, we were saving 11 billion that year. So it was nonsense.
We get back to the problem with procurement is we mark our own homework.
Roger.
So yes, I guess we can cook the books and do what we want. I mean, some of my categories are looked after over the years. I mean, if I look at my logistics category in particular, I guess someone should be paying me to actually ship stuff out now, because over the years you've probably saved more than your category spend theoretically. So yes, which is probably another subject for a whole new different podcast, Bill.
But it does create a problem in that one, companies don't actually genuinely realize any cost benefits, any cost savings to benefits, because of what they're talking about is nonsense. And two, it kind of destroys trust and makes the system cynical and makes people within the system cynical.
That's what I went back to the engagement piece that I said at the start as well. So we're doing this if you're cost cutting for survival, we get it. But as you said, we just had the last quarter, certain incentive plans aren't online. You know what? Hey, somebody up the organization wants a 2-foot longer yacht. So you know what? That's what we're cost cutting for. So his incentive plan's out. I need to deliver. And then when that skepticism comes in, that's not.
I think we all know this wonderful term Slack that you find everywhere in processes and organizations. And the hard thing is how to actually get rid of that. I would like to chip in quite a radical idea here, and I would be interested to get your point of view on that. In my personal opinion, in order to get rid of that slack, it doesn't need more processes and more regulations and more fine prints, because that's typically only then what people are trying to put in front of themselves to protect themselves personally from having done just as they have been told to. But instead, giving people way more flexibility to decide on what they think is right, with some ex post checks where you focus your activities more on where are people abusing that additional level of freedom that you have granted for personal benefits, but reducing form regulation, reducing processes wherever you can. And in my opinion, it's one of the things that Elon Musk probably is going to try in the American government. And I will be very, very curious to see how that is going to work out. I think there's a huge potential in that, getting rid of slack.
You might have a subject for a whole new podcast there. Let me just feed it back to you before I go to both Ciaran and Rajat on that, because I think it's an important one. So let me just get it. You're talking about not reducing the level of compliance activity, the level of monitoring, disciplining, and rather looking at post-event checks. Is that
Indeed,
it?
I would switch it from an ex-ante process management, what is the norm at the moment in most organizations, towards an ex post check whether people have abused the level of freedom you granted them.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in that. Just hearing you say it, I haven't heard it directly referred to as a cultural thing.
I was just going to come in on the Elon Musk thing. I don't think we should lionize this man too much. I've got the feeling in my bones that this whole Doge thing is set up to be a massive distraction for a potential hideous amount of US government deregulation, and it will be the regulations that people like Musk say are unhelpful, not people like you and me say are unhelpful. So these will be regulations like consumer protections, financial protections, things like that. I think that'll be cut. The only thing that I can hope for in that is, given that the person that he's working for, who shall remain nameless, is a notoriously fickle individual, and the two of them have got massive egos, that they will rebound off each other.
Definitely want to hear Rajat's view on Armin's thing about the compliance. But before that, on The Rest is Politics, this competitive newcomer podcast, the US version, Anthony Scaramucci, known as the Mooch, was giving his views on Doge and Elon Musk and the president. And he was asked by Alistair Campbell why he'd appointed Musk. And he said, the president-elect is sending Musk to Siberia. That's the only place you end up when you're given a cost-cutting project, and he wants him out of the room. So, sorry about that little digression. Rajat.
No, so again, when Armin was talking about the post-burst, I mean, again, with an aerospace industry background, you have the whole Lockheed Martin skunk works, if you like. So again, you had these little phantom operations kind of innovating and kind of still within a big, bad corporate oversight, if you like, but still a dedicated, kind of less regimented, free to do what you want. And that's where the innovation happens. So when Armin was talking about that, I was coming back to, okay, so Skunkworks still has a life. And I think is the Boeing CEO an ex-Skunkworks person now. So we've got somebody else from one of those kind of organizations running kind of Boeing, trying to fix the problems that they have right now. So that's going to be interesting. But Armin makes an interesting point. Given people, I guess it's back to my favorite topic, really. It's kind of trusting the people and empowering your teams to actually do more and expand and not just stay within your roots and say, hey, you know what, I'm here, and giving them more empowerment. So yeah, all for that. I mean, yeah, I know it's a podcast, but if I put my hand up and see there's a fist saying, yeah, go power for the people. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a wonderfully optimistic place to begin to wind down. Final thoughts and comments about any of the things we've raised today, or even what we ought to raise in future? I'll go to Armin first, then Ciaran, and then Rajat, if it's all right.
I would love to see a similar exercise trying to reduce complexity and simplify things and cost cut things in the public space in our organization, in our society, as well, as I'm very sure there is a lot of slack that we all simply have accepted to pay with our taxes.
Super. Thanks, Armin. Ciaran?
My takeaway from this, my reflection from this is actually the point that Armin made at the end about where you do these exercises and you give people agency and you give people the authority. You then do the post-event review to go back and say, well, did that actually work? Talking about it in corporate life, there's lots of people that talk about doing this in corporate life, but I've never seen it done well. I've never seen it done well. I've never seen it with the, okay, well, if you've saved 5 million out of your budget, I can give you 5 million less next year. Oh, no. That's not really what we meant, right? If people started doing things like that, then you would see real cost cutting.
Thanks, Ciaran. And Rajat?
Yeah, so my takeaway actually kind of, I think this podcast is my first one. Happy to be here. And it's actually changed my opinion as well. So preparing and just thinking about it, cost cutting, I pulled the face, it's all negativity. But I must say, over the last half an hour or so, actually, based on our conversation, kind of, you know what? Cost cutting can be a positive, good thing as well. So I've gone away with a change of mindset as well, the result of that. So yeah, thanks for having us.
Isn't it fantastic when you put wise people in a room, what you get out of it? Brilliant. Anyway, we've come to the end of the second episode of the Swishoes podcast, this one on cost cutting. Thank you for listening, if you have been, and we'll look forward to number 3, whatever it's about. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rajat. Thanks, Armin. Thanks, Ciaran.